Okay, so it is now 6:02. We are going to go ahead and get started. Give me 1 minute. We are going live now. Thank you everybody for being here tonight and thank you for joining us. Okay. All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Liliana. I will be filling in for our executive director tonight, Heidi. I want to thank you for joining this What's Up Wednesday, and it's a very special one as it is our very first DAD panel. We are excited to learn about the perspectives of these amazing dads who volunteered their time or were voluntold by their wives. Whichever the case may be, thank you. Dads, we promise that you are free to say anything here without getting in trouble too much. But before we start tonight's panel, I want to go over some of the ground rules. So if you would like to speak, please say your name before you begin so that the interpreter and captions can capture that. Please do not talk over each other, and you are welcome to keep your cameras on or off. However, it is helpful that if you keep them on while so you can speak if you are speaking. If you have a question or comment, just go ahead and ask, or you can write it in the chat and we can keep track of that. Thank you to Tiffany, who is the interpreter for tonight. Your service is very much appreciated. With that, I will go ahead and let Tony and Delight take it away.
Good evening, moms, dads, families. My name is Tony Vega. I am a bilingual parent guide in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm here tonight to host Side by Side with Delight. I just want to, like Liliana said, I want to thank you guys for sharing your time with us, to give us the time and to listen to what our dads have to say. Trying to think. So just to give you guys some information, so we have 3 dads that are joining us tonight, and we're going to give them each a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. And then we'll have a series of questions that each dad will decide if they want to answer. Delight, did you have anything? Did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Delight. And this is my husband, John. And we have 4 children. And we have 1 that is deaf. So John, do you want to explain? Go for it. And John saying, hello, I'm John. And I was actually born in New Zealand until I was a child, and then I moved here and I met Delight. We've been together for 16 years and we have 4 children together. We have 3 children that are hearing and that are boys, and 1 girl that is deaf. I was actually born deaf, completely deaf, and raised that way. And I was taught C-sign growing up, which is signed exact English. It's actually a very old type of language in our history. So it's a little similar to ASL, but not quite. And I actually work at PDSD, which is Phoenix Day School for the Deaf. And I've been there for 10 years now. So, yeah.
This is Tony. Thanks, John, for that. That was a great introduction. So like I said, I'm Tony, and this is my husband, Nate. And you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm here for it.
Yes.
All right, my name's Nathan Vega. We have a 12-year-old daughter that is deaf and 2 boys, a 6 and a 3-year-old, kind of spread out apart. I work for the Border Patrol. About myself.
Nothing. You're a dad of 3, 1 deaf, Isabella,
Mhm.
and he's here to tell you all about his experience, hopefully. Let's see who's next. Cheryl, do you and Bruce want to go?
Hi. Yeah, I'm Cheryl. I'm one of the parent guides with Arizona Hands and Voices, like Tony and Delight said, and Liliana. And my husband, Bruce, is here tonight to share his experiences raising a child was born deaf. And so I'll let him kind of talk a little bit about it. But we have 5 children, and our youngest son was born deaf, and he wears cochlear implants. So Bruce, I'll let you share more.
I think you summarized that fairly well. That was about all the notes I had in my head. But yeah, so I'm Bruce Gilroy. I'm married to Cheryl, obviously. We have 5 children, as Cheryl mentioned. From our oldest just turned 17, and then our youngest, Jacob, is 7. And as Cheryl said, he's deaf. Bilaterally, he wears implants. I was not born in New Zealand. And I think we have 4 boys and 1 girl. I think that about covers it.
That's awesome, Bruce. That's all we need. So now what we'll do is, like I said, I have a series of questions. I will go ahead and go through them. So you are more than welcome to answer any question that you feel comfortable with. Again, just take yourself off mute and say, this is Bruce, or this is Nate, this is John, or raise your hand so we know who's speaking so the interpreter can do her job. But we'll go ahead and start with the first question. So we already know a little bit about you guys. We know your name and we know a little bit about your child. So the first question that we have is, what has been the greatest joy for you as a dad of a deaf or hard of hearing child?
I guess I'll start. This is Bruce. Well, I'm going to start, but I don't really have a specific answer. And what I mean by that is I don't really have anything specific for, a joy related to having a deaf or hard of hearing child. The way I've always looked at it is I just look at it just like any other child. I just really don't think of it differently. I mean, it is tactically, but it's really not. And we do the same things as with all the other kids. So I really just, I never really look at it that way. And I just look at it as the same joy as you'd have with any child is my, I guess, non-answer.
Raise your hand, John.
Go ahead, John.
So for myself, I remember when she was pregnant and then we were hoping we were going to get a boy. We're like, come on, we've had a bunch of girls. We really want to get a boy. And I thought, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. But I was so happy, even though it was a daughter. And obviously I love her. And then my second was born and that was also a girl. And of course I love her as well. And then we got our third and it was a boy. And I was like, yes, finally we got a boy. And why I was so excited about that is because he was going to be able to carry on our last name. That's how boys are. When you go down the list, you're like, wait, okay, girl will probably get married. A girl will get married. And then there'll be a boy that will carry on that last name. And they're responsible for carrying our last name here. So we'll see what happens with that. But then, of course, I love my son. Now I'm not the only male in the house, which is really nice. So I have that. And then, my last is a girl who I also love as well. So.
That's a great answer, John. How about you?
It's pretty much the same as like Bruce said. When I was in high school, I actually started volunteering at ASDB as a football player. So started to learn ASL, and then when we had our daughter, it was kind of a shock that she was deaf, but at the same time, it was like I kind of been around this already. And the same thing, and I don't treat her any differently than our boys. Everything we do is everybody does it all together.
Yes, we do. And we're very busy. We're very busy with our boys. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Let's see. What has been the hardest thing for you as a dad of a deaf or hard of hearing child? Go ahead. Just see who you're- So this is
Nathan.
Nate.
Nathan. The hardest thing for me is still the communication. And I haven't thrown myself fully into learning the ASL, and that's that would be her primary mode of communication. So that's not on her, and it's on me. And yeah, it's kind of, I feel bad for not just like throwing myself at it and trying to learn as much as I can, so me and my daughter can be good, wise communicating.
I guess I'll go next. This is Bruce. To me, it's probably the schedule is really the biggest thing. And I mean, fortunately for us, in our case, Jacob was he was kind enough to take very quickly to his implants, and he's certainly, we don't have to rely so much on sign language with him. Obviously, his speech, he can be more difficult to understand than the other kids, and a little bit vice versa. But fortunately, there's not that as much of the language, I don't want to say barrier, but there's not as much of a focus on having to use dual modes of communication. But it is that schedule, that driving, and Cheryl does more of that than I do, obviously, but he's got a speech therapist in Chandler. He's got a oral motor therapist in Goodyear. His school up until very recently, or up until this past year, he was at Desert Voices, which was down, I guess, North Phoenix. So, and just all that driving around, the schedules, the additional, work, the additional therapy work at home, school meetings, advocacy, all of those kind of things. And we live in Cave Creek, by the way. So to be driving down to Chandler and then his doctor, I guess his audiologist, is in Mesa. I think so. It's that scheduling impact has been certainly a challenge, just managing that.
Thanks, Bruce. That's a great answer too. That's definitely something that it's nice to hear Dad kind of talk about that, because for us as moms, I know Cheryl knows, Liliana knows, Delight knows that sometimes that schedule and that turnaround and having, to shuttle from one thing to another, and that can be something that can be really daunting for new parents, but even parents, seasoned parents as ourselves, for moms and dads. And sometimes, the mom has to be a stay-at-home mom because they have to do that. But it's actually really nice to hear a dad say how hard it is, because you guys do pitch in, whether it's from work, whether it's on weekends, sometimes it's just to give us a time off. So I appreciate that. John, did you want to answer the question, or moving on to the next one?
Okay, so being just profoundly deaf and not speaking at all. But people think that if you're deaf, it means that you can't necessarily speak, but I learned how to sign, and that was my mode of communication. So that makes me happy. It's been really hard if I go into a room and there's a bunch of hearing people, like I, want to just touch my son right here and be like, hey, and he's like closes his eyes, like he doesn't want to hear from me. And so I'm like, hey, hey, hey. And he's like, no, 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 shaking his head. So honestly, that's been kind of the struggle. A lot of times what we'll do is I'll write on paper if I go somewhere, like, if a secretary is at an office and they'll see me signing and they're like, how am I supposed to communicate with you? And then I write it on paper or I gesture, I find a way to be able to do that for us. And then they notice, oh, he is able to communicate. Or even something like a group setting is really challenging. It's really tough to have that attention span for enough time. And I realized that it has to be really, for me, like, and my son, just one-on-one. It's much better to have that one-on-one time together. It doesn't cause all the distractions. I'm not trying to fight for attention. It's just the two of us. And that just seems to work much better. Speaking of, come here. This is our son. So I think it's really important to just have that one-on-one time for us to feel successful in our communication and our relationship.
That's so true, John. And to the parents that are joining us for our panel tonight, I know that that's something that some dads struggle with the deaf and hard of hearing children that they have in their homes at times, because connecting on that level, it can be hard if there's a communication barrier, or, you know, if environment, you know, at holidays and things like that. So that's something to consider. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Thanks for your honesty. That's great. Let's see, what's the next question? It says, do you have any tips or tricks for the dads that have helped you with your child?
This is Bruce. I think that's tough because every scenario, every kid's going to be so different, but a couple of things for kids with implants, and I guess it could apply to hearing aids as well. They come with dummy cords or little straps, or maybe Cheryl was just smart enough to buy them on their own if they didn't come with them, but if they don't come with them, you can get them. Use them. Cord those straps, use them, tie them down, clip them on the kid's shirt. It will save you when you go out in public, right? If you're going to go to to the McDonald's, or if you're going to the wherever you're going on vacation, you're going to the amusement park, you're going to the restaurant, even, especially when they're young, they don't care. Maybe when they get older, they would, but use them. It saves a lot of potential challenges. I guess, and the other one is similar to that, and there might be a story around this later if we get to it. You also have a tracking app on your phone for the implants. I assume all the implants have that. Certainly ours do. I don't remember what brand they are, but they should have a tracking app. Turn it on, sync it up, and use it before you go somewhere where you might end up needing it. Because if you don't sync it ahead of time, it will remember the last time it connected, which might be a day or a week ago or never. And it will be utterly useless and potentially even counterproductive, spinning you around thinking you might have a location when you don't. So that's my tips.
This is Cheryl, real quick. There's some funny stories around that happened to us. That's why he's telling you that. Like, we've searched through McDonald's for 2 hours. We had the whole restaurant looking for his implant, and it was at home on our couch. So it's funny stories around that.
Oh, wow.
Nathan, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't really have tricks, tips, but since she was small little toddler, I would always use the lights wherever we are, even outside. Whenever I need to get her attention, start on and off to get her attention. It always works, even when she doesn't want to hear me.
And that's definitely a great tip for some of those families that have kids that maybe have trouble wearing their devices, or kids that need hearing breaks, which happens to be our daughter is 12 years old at the moment. And we didn't mention it before, she is a bilateral cochlear implant user, but now entering middle school almost as a 6th grader, we're kind of going through a rebellious phase. So she does need hearing breaks quite often. And so when we are downstairs and she is upstairs, we do flick the lights to get her attention, and it works pretty great. So that's a great tip for those of you who might need it.
So this is John. And I mentioned before, but I'll mention it again. I've been trying to teach all of my children sign language at the same time because, like I had said before, I have 3 daughters that are hearing and then 1 son who is deaf. And so I know that he gets really frustrated if he can't communicate. So about 3 weeks ago, I realized it would be a lot better if I was with the 3 girls and then with my son one-on-one separately. It seemed like there was too much going on, too much chaos, too much distraction. So if I work with the girls 3-on-1 and then I work with my son one-on-one, he's much more attentive. He's much more with me and present in the moment than if we're all in that circle, you know, trying to teach sign language or, you know, gesture or whatever it may be. I think it's really important to allow that one-on-one time with your child.
Absolutely, John. That's a great tip for all parents of deaf and hard of hearing kiddos, at no matter what age they are. And even for those, I know with my hearing boys, sometimes having that one-on-one time with our kids, just because they need that extra attention from each individual parent. So sometimes I take it upon myself to do something special with them, especially when it comes to learning, maybe reading those books and things like that. So for sure, that's a great tip. Let's see. It says, did you have any specific goals and objectives for your child, and how did you establish them?
Nathan, I mean, this was what?
An ongoing goal.
I know ongoing goal, but
Mhm.
with both of us,
Mhm.
with the speech and I don't know what's
Learning language,
No,
probably.
what was the like the other thing?
Huge speech.
Huge speech. Like
Yeah.
we tried everything. We gave her options and set our goals. And we established them.
I think it was a lot of trial and error,
I know
right?
it's trial and error, but
Mhm.
we didn't try to force too much on her. We tried to pick a specific word or specific object or picture that she needed to learn,
Mhm.
and got her to learn it consistently until she got it, and then we move on.
Mhm.
Not trying to force everything on her at once.
Mhm.
Not too many things.
So I guess the specific goal was for her to learn language, whether that was spoken language or in sign language.
So
Yeah.
This is Bruce. For us, obviously, it's having that language as well. And in our case, we didn't have to push too hard on it. It was Jacob is extraordinarily social, far more than any of our other kids actually, and which in a way, you know, we actually have to pull them away from strangers sometimes. And you know, hey, listen, yes, you can wave hi to the kid at the next table at the restaurant. Don't go bother them. They don't want to have a conversation with you necessarily. So we have to kind of pull them back. But that was extremely helpful in him wanting to learn language, in him taking to the implants as well as he has, I think. Obviously, he still has a long way to go with articulation and a lot of things, but he kind of, we had the same general goal, but he kind of set the path a little bit, in terms of, you know, he was very much wanted to talk. And so that was not obvious at first, but became pretty obvious fairly quickly that he definitely wanted to be vocal, and so that was really helpful. So that kind of defined its own path a little bit on what we did and the approach we took.
Hi, this is Cheryl. Real quick, John, if I could jump in just to add something to that. When Jacob was adopted, so he was in the foster care system. So when he came into our home at 2, he had no language. Just so people have a little background information. So he didn't have any language. And so we did start with sign language. So he was exposed to ASL at 2, and that was his first language. And I do feel like for Jacob, that was helpful to have that bridge between like the sign language, the bridge to spoken language. So in our family, in our case, we found helpful, well, for Jacob, it was helpful for him to have that base of language to be able to kind of springboard off that to learn spoken language, so that if he didn't understand something, I could sign it. And even today, if I don't understand him, like we still have the sign language that we can use to fall back on just for clarity with his speech. And so I just wanted to say that also. Thanks.
Good point, even though it's the dad's panel.
Sorry.
No, that's a good point, and it certainly is helpful to have a teacher of the deaf in the house. So, or someone fluent in sign, because yeah, it was a good bridge.
Okay, so John here. I know each individual is different and special in their own ways, and they're all going to have different goals. But for us, with Jacob being completely deaf, using sign language, typing, writing back and forth, and using English, because my wife, she'll sign and speak. But it was completely different for us versus what he needs. So I have a brother who was born deaf as well, or a son. When my son was born deaf, I was completely shocked. I don't know why. I mean, looking back, it was just different than what we had gone through already. And it was the same way. Going to school with no support for myself. And then they thought, oh, he's fine. And I would just be ignored in those kind of situations. And that's definitely not the best way that things should go. You really want to take advantage of whatever school they're going to, or putting them at a school for the deaf. And when they learn how to spell something, then they can also learn what that sounds like if they have any level of hearing. So he was able to go to school, and he has an ASL interpreter, and they're able to capture that information that he's missing from sound. So as far as the system goes, and being able to talk and just have that basic knowledge in the back of your mind, he's able to take all that in and benefit from it. Where in the beginning, I had none of that, and I was not able to learn that way. So when he goes to school, he's using sign language. Then when he comes home, he's motivated from what he's learned at school. You know, he's not just coming home from school and watching TV the whole time. He's very expressive. And I remember when he would work on like trying to listen to something and pick things up on what he's hearing. So it's interesting just having a son that's so different in our family, and making sure that everything works out for them, and just being patient. It's definitely a challenge, and making sure that we can understand each other. It's been really good.
Thanks, John. That was a great answer. I'm just sitting here kind of thinking that we are really lucky to have 3 kind of different situations. Although, like for example, Cheryl's son kind of has the same sort of hearing loss. All hearing loss are different, even though, you know, our kids might use cochlear implants, but their communication styles are very different. Delight and John are a deaf household with deaf parents, so their experience and their teaching styles are different. So we're really lucky to kind of have different perspectives tonight to kind of hear, you know, what works for everybody. And I want to remind the audience that every single one of our families is going to have a different type of hearing loss, a different type of communication style, a different type of education choices, or maybe availability in our areas. So it's really important to kind of like hear, take it all in, and always weigh your options, you know, ask for resources, read about things, because we're all going to be different. And I think that's really awesome to kind of hear from everybody tonight on kind of like what works. So the next question was kind of a piece to that question. It says, did you have a plan to achieve those goals, and what did you do when things didn't go to plan? So I kind of want you guys to think about that. So think about kind of like what our goals were, what the objectives were, and if something didn't work out, what did you do in that situation? I want you guys to kind of think about it.
So this is Bruce. I mean, I think it's important to have a plan, and that doesn't mean it's an overarching plan that has multiple, you know, sub facets and whatnot. But certainly, and maybe you do have different plans for different things. Certainly with school, and certainly once you get out, I don't know. We had IEPs, you know, when he was, or maybe it wasn't the right word. Cheryl can correct me where I'm going off on the acronyms, but so he had his plan when he was at Desert Voices, which is the school for the deaf, specifically preschool for the deaf here in the Phoenix area. We always had to have a plan about what the goals were with the team, what we were going to be working on with him, and then you have to have a little bit of a different plan when you go into public school or a general private or a charter or whatever you're moving into, right? Because there's the advocacy, you've got to have accommodation, you've got to have all these things, and the resources. How much speech are they going to get? Do they get speech? Do they need you know, the FM systems? I forget what they're called exactly, but there's all these different factors that you actually have to have in place, and you have to be thinking about these things and what the tools are that you need to have in place. Otherwise, it's just these things don't happen by themselves. You have to be driving these things, and the schools are generally not going to be driving these things. You have to do it. So you have to have a plan around that. And again, it could be, so there's a plan around that. There's it also encompasses, you know, how much speech therapy do they need, or do they need, in our case, Jacob needs oral motor. He has a lot of work he has to do with his tongue and things of that nature, as well as actual speech. How much of that can they get at school? How much of that would be optimal to supplement privately, right? All these, where can you get it? How much can you do? How much can you fit into your schedule, right? How much does he need? All these things. You just have to have a plan around that and look at the results. As far as when things don't go to plan, things are never actually going to go to plan. So it just, the one of the biggest things is flexibility. Just understand that, you know, embrace the uncertainty of what's going to happen. Embrace the uncertainty of if your plan is going to work out, or even if your objectives are going to be entirely realistic a year from now, and just understand that, and that you're going to have to adjust. And I guess I think that's been our approach to it.
It's kind of Nathan. We kind of had the same plan process. In the beginning, we wanted her to speak. We wanted that language for her. But as time went on, as we went through speech, as we tried cue speech, it was always like, this whole thing is that every child is different. So yeah, you go for a plan, it didn't work, we tried something else. tried something else, tried doing speech. She was progressing, but then it was just kind of went stagnant. We went more to ASL. It's just like Tony wrote in the message there, the flexibility. If it's not working for your child, or your child's different, move on to something else.
I think, so this is Tony. I think that was one of the things that I can say we've done well. Is kind of when we had our objectives, and if things were going along and we kind of, hit a barrier, we would kind of always sit down. We still do. We sit down, we kind of chat about it, and, okay, what are we afraid of? Where are we going? What can we do? What can we add to this, IEP? What can we add to, should we stop speech therapy? Should we continue speech therapy? Do we need a tutor? We kind of always sit down and talk about things, and we have adjusted and we've added different things. Not only just mom and dad, but, with the teacher teams. And so we've been able to be flexible and change things as we go. And it's kind of a scary thing because you're like, you need a plan, you need a set, but as Isabella has grown, there have been so many changes. And like John mentioned, Delight and I have had conversations about this because Delight's great. She's one of our deaf and hard of hearing guides. So I kind of reach out to her as a parent for her deaf perspective. We've had conversations about what mom and dad necessarily want for her might not be what she needs. So John mentioned that earlier. We've kind of gotten to the point where we sit down with her, we talk with her, and some of those objectives and some of those goals, we have to see where she is at, as a kid, as a young adult, as a deaf person. So that's been kind of hard, but flexibility is key again.
This is Bruce. If I can just add something back to that as well, I think one of the things that is challenging that you probably will run into is even when things are going to plan, at least we've had some cases where then things go south, right? We're making progress in a certain area and then he reverts or things degrade a little bit. It's like, wait a minute, his speech was so much better last year when we were doing these things, and now we're in this different environment and it's completely sliding backwards. And you just got to, again, it's upsetting, but that's not really helpful. So it's just, you've got to be constantly kind of reevaluating, what are we doing? What, if things have stopped progressing or if they're sliding backwards, one, is that still even a focus area? And maybe other things are more important, or we're just going to accept that and deal with that right now. Or maybe, no, we do need to get this back on track. What do we need to adjust to do that? So it's not, the progress isn't going to be linear. So.
So this is John. So before our son went into kindergarten, he knew some basics. Like he knew that he had to talk face to face with someone to communicate. He knew that he had to sit very close to the teacher and be near that table. And then when he went into first grade, so we added a Baja. And then he had an FM system. So if someone was speaking, he would be able to hear better. And then, of course, it changed again. And we added an interpreter who provided sign language and language for him. And it was not perfect the first time. The plan was never perfect the first time. There were many changes that were happening. But we did notice the teachers that he was really paying attention to, if they were speaking too loud or if they were speaking too quietly, we kind of had to remind the school of what he needed and what was important for his education. So he kind of knew which teachers were going to be clear to understand and explain very well. And he knew which teachers he was going to have a hard time with. So that was something that happened with him. But the plan is always changing. So as of right now, when COVID hit, obviously that was a large challenge for him because the mask covered up half of our face. And we rely heavily on that to be able to pick up communication and non-manual markers. And he didn't have that anymore. So he would come home and he would just be so frustrated and blow up and just angry and walking around the house not okay. And it was really tough. And we had to figure out something we could do to support his emotional needs during that time so that he could be stable again. We had to be his support system. That was kind of our plan.
That's so great. I know, I'm glad you brought that up because COVID was, I mean, still is at times really difficult for our kids, especially with the mask wearing, especially with the lack of communication or even the virtual schooling. That was just so hard for some of our kids. And that emotional well-being, when we talk about progress, sometimes we talk about like language progress or speech progress or whatever, but sometimes we need to kind of take a step back and think about like those little inches that we made, whether it's just having a good day, whether it's, especially during these times, because our kids really went through it this past year. So I'm glad you mentioned that, John. That's awesome. So the next question is fun because I want to hear about the funny stories you guys have. It says, do you have any funny stories or things that have happened to you as a dad of a deaf or hard of hearing kiddo? So I want to hear about the funny stories or the lost hearing aids or all that kind of stuff.
I guess I'll start. This is Bruce, since we already kind of hit on one of our stories a little bit. But yeah, it goes back to keeping those straps on, figure out a way to dummy cord those things down to the kid. We were in a McDonald's, and I don't remember why we were there. The McDonald's with a big play place. Maybe it was after church or something like that. Maybe it was before, actually. But so I think it was before, if I remember right. I don't think we ever made it. But so we were there to get some food, let the little kids play. And maybe after, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, it was time to go. We, hey, Jacob, let's go. He was missing an implant. I think if I remember right, he had one, he didn't have the other one. And so we're like, okay, go back up there and get your implant. And that's one thing. He has not been very good about communicating with us when it's not on, when he doesn't have them both, when one's not working. So that actually has been a bit of a challenge to kind of get him to choose to let us know as soon as things go a little bit sideways with his implants. But he couldn't find it. So we sent the other kids up into the play area to go find his implant somewhere. And there's maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 other kids in there. Nothing. It's like, all right. I went up in there to look for it. And then it occurred to us, wait a minute, we have this tracking app. Let's turn it on. We found the one implant that he had, couldn't find the other one. And this is after probably 20 minutes at this point, 30 minutes. And we're saying, wait a minute, it's not here. Well, is it actually, did some other kid grab it and leave and drive away with it? Did it just turn off because it was off of his head? So it powered down and therefore it's not, we can't find it. So we were probably there for a good hour and a half. We had other families with other kids looking for this implant. It was ridiculous. Finally, we're like, we're not finding it. We're thinking maybe it just left with some other kid grabbed it, thought it was interesting, and they drove off. So we left all the information with the McDonald's manager and say, hey, if anybody turns this in, if anybody finds something, if whatever. So we got back home, and turns out I think it was our daughter. Somebody I think found it. I don't think it was Jacob, and said, hey, his implant's on the couch, or it was on the ottoman or something like that the whole time. And so that was interesting. I guess another one similar situation to that. Even just this, I think it was this past Easter, we pull up to a family member's house for an Easter celebration in the morning, and Jacob gets out of the truck. He has one implant on. So, okay, where's your other implant? Didn't know, couldn't find it. He thought maybe one of the other kids knocked it off his head. He didn't tell us about that, of course, at the time. And so we searched the truck for probably 15 minutes. It turns out, I guess maybe this could be followed under tips. Implants, and I assume hearing aids, I'm sure as well, they can and they probably will fall into the most unexpected and difficult to get to places. His implant got knocked off his head. And it went back up inside into his car booster seat behind the fabric cushion inside that car seat. And so we're tearing it apart, looking at, the floor, looking under the car seat. It was inside the car seat, behind the fabric, between the fabric and the plastic. So again, it's just one of those things. That was probably another 25-minute search for something that was, in this case, actually right there.
There's
Okay,
nothing
so
to
we're
do.
arguing because the best parenting story that we have was when Isabella was a baby. And he says, no, it has nothing to do with her being deaf and hard of hearing. But you guys have to hear the story because we were very young parents and Nathan was in the Marine Corps at the time. And I think we were so worried just about her being deaf and all the tests and, all the stress of that stuff that we took other things for granted, like nursing, like just being first-time parents. And you have to tell. It was great.
No, fine. It really doesn't have anything to do with.
But it's a great
Yeah.
parenting story. It's a great parenting story.
So we're at Oceanside, where Camp Pendleton is.
Mhm.
Every week I gotta get a haircut. So me, Tony, we brought the baby. And they play. I think that's the only thing that relates to is they played music and everybody's talking. So she's deaf. She doesn't. Nothing's worrying her or anything. She's feeding her.
Yeah.
I'm waiting to get my haircut. I got a white T-shirt on. I go to pick her up. I pick her up, kind of play with her a little bit, and then she just barfs all over me. Like my shirt was soaked. And all the people and all the other Marines and people there, they're like, oh. Well, it happens, I guess.
Nothing will ever make me forget the sound of the barbershop of all these big burly Marines, all these and so whenever we tell Isabella stories of when she's a baby, you always tell her that story. That's our favorite parenting story.
I've been trying to rack my brain to think of something because there's so many different situations that have happened with my son and I over the years, but I was reminding him when he goes to sleep that he needs to brush his teeth. And he was like, no. And I'm like, what do you mean? He was like, hold on. So I said, if you put your laundry in the basket and you can get your jammies out of there and then you can brush your teeth. So then he got dressed and he brushed his teeth and I was like, okay, awesome. But really what I was asking him to do, I expected him to do the opposite. So he tends to do the opposite of what we tell him to do. So he's very smart. And for example, what just happened recently, oh my gosh, we were laughing so hard. It was really funny. So it was the morning time and he got up and we were still in bed. And he was talking and like tapping us. And we're like, if you can be patient, like when a baby is being born, how it's very painful for a mom. And I said, you could give birth. So he thought that you could just like pinch somebody and that would be the same pain as like giving birth. But really all the props go to her because she's the one who went through that. So, and then there was one more example. So we were swimming in the pool and he's actually really good at diving under the water and holding his breath. He puffs out his cheeks and holds his nose. And I didn't like it. So I kind of went underwater and did the same thing and tried to puff out my cheeks, hold my nose. And then as I went under, he was like, Dad, what are you doing that for? What, you can just go under and swim. Why are you doing that? And I was like, oh, sorry. I was just a habit. That's just something that I do in the water once in a while. So he just noticed I was doing that and thought it was funny.
I love funny stories, especially with our kids, because there's so many. And sometimes things get so serious that we have to sit down and kind of like remember to just breathe, to just laugh, to just take things in. Because I know for us with having R3, God, man, sometimes it's so serious. Sometimes it's so busy. That's like we have to just take some time to, to grab the joy. Because it's hard, friends. It's hard to be parents to any kids, any amount of kids. But hats off to you guys, especially those of you who have 4 or 5 kids. Yeah. So we are coming up on the top of the hour, so it's 6:52, and I'd like to hear from the dads to see if they have any last bits of advice for dads starting the journey. So those dads that have babies who are being identified, or maybe young toddlers or late identified kiddos, any advice for those dads that you wish someone would have told you when you started?
This is John. So sorry, I know that I was going last and now I'm kind of taking over first, but I'm here. So for me, I think what's important being a deaf person, what's most important in this situation is just focusing on the person first. Not their identity as being deaf or hearing, but just that they're human. They're a person first. I think that's really important. So I just wanted to throw that tidbit out there.
Okay, this is Bruce. So along with that, I think that also goes along with maintaining expectations, and not, as I think Nate and I as well kind of talked about in the beginning, really not treating them differently. I mean, to extent you will, because you have to, because you're doing different things. But we've always tried to kind of maintain expectations that, hey, they're just one of the other kids. They have the same expectations as far as their behavior, their conduct. I mean, I think there's definitely a tendency sometimes, probably from both dads and moms, but I mean, I think in our house, Cheryl has to keep more of a deliberate check on that, of not rescuing them. And this applies to all kids, by the way, not just, deaf or hard of hearing kids or kids with special needs, but especially when kids have special needs, there's seems to be more of a tendency to want to kind of save them or coddle them a little bit more. And it's just, my advice is don't. Obviously you have to give them special help, but only to the extent necessary. Because, if you're helping them too much, you're hurting them. So that would be one thought. I guess beyond that, and we already kind of talked about, embracing the uncertainty. Things are you don't know what's gonna happen. That's gonna cause stress in itself. And that's something that we've talked about, even with our other kids. We don't know what's gonna happen. There's a challenge, there's something that's really scary or really concerning, and just understanding that that's gonna be there. And we don't know what that end is gonna look like. We don't know where they're going to get to exactly, but you just deal with what you can deal with, and it's like, we'll do what we can do now and then we'll see. And I guess that's about it. Around that, control what you can control and just embrace that. And I guess the only other thing for the dads, and I guess for any moms as well, your wife or your husband will probably be processing some of this stuff differently than you will. I know for me, I was really always focused on what is the end state going to look like, whether it was with Jacob or with our other kids who have had to have surgeries and other things. What's going to happen? My focus was getting them to be okay, or getting them to be in whatever optimal state we could get them to. And Cheryl was feeling the same way, of course, but she struggled a lot more with the fact that they were struggling or that they were in pain or that they were having a challenge and that they were being affected emotionally or physically. And that was really hard for her. And it was, one of the things I learned was just to let her feel that and just to be supportive of that and not try and kind of gloss over that and just get to the point of, yes, but they're going to be okay. And, we have a plan for this and things are going in the right direction. So everything will be fine, probably. But to actually just let her have that pain and let her really grieve that stuff, and be supportive of that, and then kind of allow for that while you're trying to move things forward. So that's it.
It's pretty much everything we just said. Every child's going to be different. You got to work with what they're learning or what they catch on to and what they're struggling with. Maybe you got to try a different approach. And yeah, like you said, I don't treat her any differently than my boys. Everybody's the same. Like I said, you are going to treat them differently with the aspect of being deaf or hard of hearing. But yeah, the expectations, the goals, I want them to be her to be the best that she can be without forcing her having to do it. So if she's at a point where she's burnt out or she's not just getting it, then take a step back. And it's with any kid that's learning. It's not going to be any different.
That's great, guys. I just want to take the time to thank everybody, all the parents, Bruce, John, and Nate, for joining us tonight for the Dads panel. I know in our flyer we said that we always hear from the moms, and now it's time to hear from the dads. And I really think that a dad's perspective is very unique because we don't really get a lot of that. And I know for some dads it's hard to talk about these sort of things. But we know, at least I know in our family, he's been a great support and a backbone for decisions and for educational choices and just overall, like Bruce was saying, just being that emotional support for families. So I want to encourage those parents that are here with us, especially new parents, if we have any, to really kind of just grieve and as a partner, even if you don't understand or even if you're having trouble, just kind of support each other as a mom, as a dad, as a family in this journey with our kids. So like I said, I want to thank Bruce and John and Nate for joining us tonight. We're really excited about this. Liliana?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to all the dads. Like Tony said, we don't always get their perspective. So this was a really special one. And thank you to Tony and Delight and Cheryl for putting this together. And a special thanks to our interpreter, Tiffany, for being amazing and doing the interpreting for this whole session. With that said, I hope you guys learned something from tonight. I'm sure I did. And I wish you well. Have a good night. Be on the lookout for our next Story Beats event that is happening. Cheryl, remind me when that's happening.
Sorry. It's the second Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock. So I can't remember right now what date that would be.
This is Liliana. Just be on the lookout because we will email it to you and it will be on Facebook. So again, thank you so much for joining us and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you guys. Thanks everyone. I appreciate you guys. We're so lucky to have these children and be on this journey.
Thank you. Yeah.
All of you guys, Bruce, John, I've heard a lot about you, John. And Delight has been a great resource to me. So I appreciate you joining us tonight. And I know just the fact that you're a teacher of the deaf I'm always like, hey, Delight this and hey, Delight that. And I ask a lot of questions. So I appreciate you. I know you help with that stuff.
You're welcome.